Okay, and we are ready.
My name's Michael, this is Thomas, and unfortunately Sid isn't able to be here today due to personal reasons, but we are going to go ahead with the recording of our group assignment regardless. So we decided to do a civics and citizenship unit. Next slide, please. So our group has decided to create a Year 9 Civics and Citizenship unit that covers several different skills and knowledge codes within the Victorian curriculum over a 4-week period. The curriculum covers Year 9s and 10s for a period of 2 years, which is why we have only included 50 to 75% of the accessible skills and knowledge. The idea would be that the remainder would be taught in Year 10. Next slide, please. Throughout the 4-week period, there will be a range of different assessment strategies in order to develop and craft students' development and learning. Diagnostic assessment, evaluating students' current level of knowledge and capacities within a subject. AFL, also known as assessment for learning or formative assessment, measures the students' progress, a tool for feedback during the learning phase, as well as the teacher's capabilities and progress. Next. AOL, assessment of learning. Summative assessment takes place after the learning process has been completed and provides information that summarizes the teaching and learning process and the level of success. Next slide, please. The diagnostic assessment will be completed by students at the beginning of the unit prior to any learning in order to evaluate students' current level of knowledge and capacities within the subject. Students will be given a pre-test including a prompt and a select number of questions in relation to the prompt, as well as other questions. Each of the questions in the diagnostic assessment task will be directly linked to the Victorian curriculum codes in the scope and sequence. The diagnostic assessment process is critical to the success of a unit as it provides immediate data and feedback that can be used in order to organize instructional groups and adjust lessons and formative assessment tasks. Next slide, please. Below is a small example of the skills and knowledge a student will be marked against. In the diagnostic assessment, the expectation will be that the students are at D, working towards the standard. But as the unit unfolds and a number of formative assessments are undertaken, students will be expected to be at standard by the summative assessment. However, as classes typically contain students of varying capabilities, the focus will be on growth rather than achievement level. Next slide, please. After completion of the diagnostic assessment task, students will go through 3 weeks of instructional activities where the teacher will teach each skill and knowledge in the scope and sequence chart by delivering engaging lessons and activities linked to each VC code. For example, for the VC code asking students to analyse a contemporary issue of relevance to Australia, topics such as change of date, legalising cannabis, social media use, etc. will be examined. At the end of each series of lessons covering each VC code, students will have a classroom or homework activity that assesses how they are progressing, which is a formative assessment task, which the teacher will use to gauge whether modifications or adjustments need to be made to the unit plan or instructional groups. Bennett 2011 states that formative assessment is a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning to improve students' achievement of intended instructional outcomes. An example of instructional lesson will be analysing Australian issue, Australia Day. Classroom discussion and a short video about Australia Day and change the date will be prompted to the class. The teacher will then model how to establish the difference between facts and opinions, research relevant articles, write down 2 to 3 arguments for and against each side of the issue, stating a stance on an issue with justifications. The students and teachers will complete these activities with a gradual release of scaffolding. Students will then analyse an issue of their choice for a formative assessment task and will be marked accordingly against a rubric. They will be given a graphic organizer with a space to record information similar to the modelled and scaffolded task in the previous lesson. The other skills will be taught and formatively assessed similarly, and sometimes 2 skills may be taught and assessed simultaneously as they complement each other. I'll pass it on to you, Thomas.
Yep. So Year 9 Civics and Citizenship focuses on building academic literacy and understanding of governance and politics in Australia. The curriculum for this year level builds students' general capabilities of evaluating and analysing features of Australia's political system, its policies, international legal obligations, and governmental roles using critical thinking skills, literacy, and numeracy skills. So, this unit relies on strong literacy comprehension. EL learners will struggle to comprehend words and grammatical structures to form their views and arguments in writing and oral presentations. This will impede their overall engagement in the subject. Therefore, to accommodate EL learners, the unit plan will focus on vocabulary building and sentence structure to clearly frame and articulate their thinking. This strategy will also support students who are non-EL backgrounds. Students from this background need greater attention to their language development. Department of Education and Training 2015 states that team teaching is most successful when the EL learner or MEA and the classroom teacher present the content at the start of every new unit together and employ effective EAL and literacy teaching strategies, as EL learners may need to learn both new vocabulary and concepts when a task is linguistically demanding. Civics and citizenship relies on contextual information, inferences, and textual analysis. The differentiation allows EL students to decode their reading cohesively, achieving coherent reading and writing practices as they develop the language mechanism over the course of the study. EAL learners need support from the MEAs, multicultural education aids, in other words, to provide translation of terminologies that parallel their past education studies from the home country, especially those who are recent arrivals, who is either an international student, migrant, or refugee background in the first language. Like Michael has suggested, as students learn about Australia Day, a holistic approach is needed to provide pupils with EL backgrounds the understanding, knowledge, and skills to foster active awareness of democracy, government, and how laws are upheld to play an active part of society when approaching such assessments that use these concepts. However, setting up a clear context of the lesson and learning outcomes is needed as well. This is done by providing a display of themes, concept of idea of the unit plan in visual format across the board, whiteboard in particular, that explores the frameworks of how political systems work. Sessional ETL 2015 suggests. The theme for Australia Day is understanding Australia as a nation, the concept of national identity. When students are asked to learn about Australia Day, the themes underpin fairness, nationhood, Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultures. These themes are reflected by a set of targeted vocabulary words as seen in the table students need to define in their assessments. Assessments need to be effective and must reflect the students' learning outcomes, as Smith 2016 states that assessment is a well-informed practice to bring a deep understanding of teachers' professional learning and students' learning the language it conveys. As EL students come from religious, cultural, and subjective individual orientations as well. EL learners can choose any modern issue that applies to their cultural heritage to express their viewpoints and concerns to the class for their formative assessments. To cater for EL learners and build a good resource structure for them in preparation for the formative and subsequent assessments, word climb worksheets and closed passages are needed. Here's an example of an activity EL students can do. According to the High Impact Teaching Strategies for EL Learners for the Department of Education Training 2015 handbook, EL learners need word climb and closed passage activities to expand the vocabulary and discover shades of meaning between words. This activity is useful to introduce language embedded within a genre in low bands, but also encourages students to develop their vocabulary when presenting findings, information, and solutions in higher years and higher bands. Using these supplementary worksheets, the MEA, EL teacher, and the EL student can discuss and draw comparisons using good vocabulary from their home country in Australia. They can make distinctions between the two different cultures and also make proper, culturally appropriate judgments. Using this teaching process demonstrates collaboration between MEAs and teachers in the classroom. The staff collaboration is an example of team teaching to achieve this differentiated teaching practice. Therefore, it can be argued that an education support staff and a teacher that works together at the most value incentives for co-teaching. Teachers should adapt an equal status approach that sub-branches to parallel teaching. As Wheeler and 2005 states that co-teaching gives opportunities to collaboratively plan and reflect on their work on the students' progress. Hongsfield and Dove 2019 parallels this notion from Wheeler and 2005 and suggests that parallel teaching accelerates English learners' knowledge and understanding of mainstream curricula. Hongsfield and Dove 19 advises that teachers, similar to Beaton and Simmons 2014 suggestion for teachers, is to share lesson plans and learn to engage in an entire collaborative instructional cycle. The use of words such as there alongside co-teach connotes inclusive language. Therefore, inclusive practice through language, through parallel and team teaching is needed to differentiate EL learners with their literacy and language development. This differentiation teaching can also be expanded and applied for students who are born in Australia but comes from a bilingual background, thus making it versatile for any learner to learn effectively in the classroom. I will pass on the slide to Michael.
So the summative assessment task is completed over the fourth and final week of the unit, spanning over 3 or 4 lessons. It covers all of the Victoria curriculum codes and the scope and sequence chart. This summative assessment task is designed to foster engagement. The assessment is broken down for students in 8 different parts, as you can see on the PowerPoint. Each part will have tasks that meet the criteria against the Victorian curriculum codes, and that can be assessed on the final rubric. William 2016 highlights that if our feedback doesn't change the student in some way, it has probably been a waste of time. The purpose of diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments is to add value. Growth is more important than achievement, so we must constantly reflect on our own practices and ask ourselves, is what you're doing helping them achieve growth? Next slide, please. So this is Sid's contribution to the transcript and PowerPoint, but unfortunately he's not here today, so I will cover it. Engagement amongst learners can formulate in 3 distinct yet interrelated dimensions: behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. According to Fredericks et al. 2004, the unit plan aims to engage students through assessments that target the behavioral, emotional, and cognitive temporality of learning. This unit planner is permitted with various formative assessments as these tasks explore real-world topics. The intrinsic motivation of learners could flourish since they directly become implicated with these issues, targeting the aforementioned aspects of behavior and emotion. Intrinsic motivation can prove to positively impact students' performance in assessment since their direct involvement and interest can possibly transcend the rigid norm reference parameters of rubrics criteria. In the midst of all this, students also begin to cognitively examine how such topics may influence their existence outside of educational institutions, and hence the 3 distinct principles of students' engagements have been fulfilled. Furthermore, students are afforded autonomy in these assessment tasks, which further enhances their intrinsic motivation. For instance, the lessons involving Australia Day are followed by key skills and knowledge that students can utilize outside of educational settings. These include exploring the nuances of independent research, the importance of factual reporting, and the dangers of bias and misinformation. This is then succeeded by a formative task, creating a graphic organizer. The autonomy arises from learners being able to develop their own topic for this assessment. Topic examples range. Ultimately, all assessment cycles should involve the diagnostic, formative, and summative paradigms. This unit planner 2 aims to explore all 3 scopes. The first 2 lessons are centered around the idea of diagnostic assessment. This involves ascertaining what the learner knows, which is, according to Asabel 1968, the most important single factor influencing learning. Asabel 1968 encourages educators to ascertain this and teach accordingly. The unit planner follows this recommendation. It begins by diagnostically assessing students' ability and follows this by exploring several formative assessments with the entire classroom. Lastly, the planner concludes with a summative assessment task, which is creating a political party. At this stage, the learner is able to actively apply the succession of skills and knowledge they have cultivated. This juncture concludes the assessment cycle. The summative assessment task engages students cognitively and provides them with a platform upon which they can explore the behavioral, emotional, and cognizant intricacies of various topics they have explored throughout the unit planner. Real-world contexts afford this unit planner a subject-specific scope, and with deliberate attention on concluding the assessment cycle aptly while targeting the 3 key scopes of student engagement. The notion of assessment. Engagement can be actualized in a very promising way through this document. Thomas?
So the unit outline offers a comprehensive list of scope and sequencing while also allowing space for differentiated learners to be included in such activities at their own level. Research has suggested important remarks on differentiation processes that apply for EL learners especially. Research presented in this presentation has emphasized student autonomy and the important elements of team teaching and parallel teaching needed to construct an inclusive classroom environment. A myriad of research suggested and activities shown throughout this presentation through parallel teaching and team teaching. to, again, construct an inclusive classroom environment. This concludes the Year 9 Civics and Citizenship Unit online presentation. Thank you. And we will stop recording from there.
So I think we did